Good evening and welcome to Hidden Histories, URBAN-15's online e-magazine for arts and cultural history, primarily from the San Antonio and Bexar County, Central Texas region. And we want to welcome everybody on our online audience, especially those who are in other countries that listen to us and watch us faithfully. And we have a very special show for you tonight because we're going to be actually dealing a lot with the written word. And the written word and how we archive our history through books and through technology, and how this written word gives us a substance for activism. And what we'd like to do tonight is pursue three areas. One is working with the San Antonio Public Library System, and we have the director of that library system, Ramiro Salazar, who's with me tonight, and the person that's in charge of the Texana archives, Heather Ferguson, she's with us also, and she's going to be talking about what the San Antonio Library System is doing in terms of documenting and preserving histories, the family histories of San Antonio, the important documents that sometimes aren't the legal documents, perhaps they're not at the courthouse or at City Hall, but they're in people's closets, they're hope chests, they're the top drawer of their father's bureau. These are the histories that they preserve and have for our access. We will also be working with Greg Harman tonight, who's one of the clean energy and clean environment representatives for the Sierra Club. And he has a great group of people who'll be talking about how they've been able to use the archives available within our community to help develop their positions on public policy and how environmental policy is really a thing that often affects equity issues, economic discrepancy, locality, and even race. And we're going to pursue those environmental things tonight. And finally, at the end of this program, we'll be bringing in a new initiative from the San Antonio Library Foundation, and that's the Latina Leadership in the Library process, where they are raising money for the Texana collection, and in particular, they're trying to find those and solicit those histories from the Hispanic community here in San Antonio. So we've got a great show, and I want to thank all of you who send us emails, letters, and phone calls with suggestions about future programs. We have enough to go for 10 years just from your suggestions. So stay in touch, and we'll proceed with the program tonight. I want to thank our sponsors, particularly the City of San Antonio's Film Commission. We want to thank Santikos Foundation, the San Antonio Area Foundation, Del Angel Foundation as well as the Texas Commission on the Arts and Bexar County Department of Economic and Community Development. I mean, all of y'all have been just so great in supporting this concept. This is an online show, and anybody in the world can actually watch it this very moment if they log on. So this is what we're doing here at URBAN-15, and thank you for your support. So let's proceed with our special guest tonight, Ramiro and Heather. Y'all are putting together something really amazing at the library, and so I want to know, what is it about San Antonio and our library system that would compel you to leave Dallas?
Well, I'm very passionate about public libraries. Libraries are very important in building stronger cities, building and empowering communities. I think that's a better word, empowering communities. So I've been working in libraries for many years. My first professional job was as library director of the Eagle Pass Public Library, which is on the border. I'm from the border, I'm from Del Rio. And so I think being a border borderland individual, provides a unique perspective as it relates to the importance of libraries. So I want to get back to the importance of libraries and what brought me here to San Antonio after being the director of libraries for the Dallas Public Library System for 12 years. The last year I did an interim assistant city manager before I decided to come to San Antonio. So in San Antonio, there was this effort to create a library district, and that really appealed to me. And let me tell you what's the difference between the library district and a library that is part of a city municipality, which is what the San Antonio Public Library is. And there's advantages to and disadvantages to being a city department. The disadvantage is that we're always fighting for that piece of the pie. So there's finite resources, and so that's the disadvantage. So we're fighting other city services for a share of the resources the city offers. In the library district, you generate your own revenues, either through property taxes or a combination of property taxes or sales tax. When I came to San Antonio, there was a Blue Ribbon Commission that was established by the city and the county to explore the possibility of, well, actually more than the possibility, to really look at creating a library district. The city leaders, the Library Foundation, the Library Board of Trustees, City Council, and county commissioners were supportive of really seriously looking at creating a library district. In fact, they worked to pass enabling legislation at the state level to allow the city the size of San Antonio the opportunity to establish a library district. So that really is what brought me here. Secondarily is the fact that I would be closer to home, Del Rio, my mom, who's elderly, who passed away about 3 months ago. So that was the other reason coming back to San Antonio. And so that's what brought me to San Antonio. So what keeps me here in San Antonio is this work that we do as librarians, as a library director. We're very passionate about helping transform the community and transform lives through the services that we offer, through the outreach that we provide, through the resources that we offer to the community, and the resources are many. Heather will talk about our special collections and what they offer and why it's important to preserve our history and to provide those resources and make them available to scholars and students and authors and so on, why it's important to offer that collection.
And I always go back to in the beginning was the word, but he didn't say if it was a spoken or the printed word. And that's really important for us to know that information comes from the poets and the writers of the world. And up until recent times, everything we knew about the past was embedded in clay or in stone. And because that was the way things were preserved. So the invention of paper is pretty amazing. And now the invention of memory devices is the next step into it. And how we preserve things is kind of where the Texana scene is so important to San Antonio and Texas. And Heather, can you give us a quick hint of who was the smartest person there who decided, hey, we need a Texana collection? There's got to be somebody who can think.
Well, the reality is that the public library, San Antonio Public Library, has had a Texana collection since the beginning, when the Carnegie Library opened in 1903. But it really wasn't until 1916 when the library board purchased a private 528 books from a private library that the collection was established. And then in the 20s, in 1922, the Texana, the Texas index cards were developed. So that the idea behind that was to provide, it was an index system to provide quick access to history, important topics that were buried in books and publications. So a quick access to that. And then to couple that in Later in the 1930s, as part of a WPA project, that is when the Texas clipping files began. So the library started clipping newspaper clippings and filing them and indexing them in that original card catalog. So all along from the very beginning, it was about providing access to information and to allow researchers to get at that access and to get at that information as quick as possible. And it really wasn't until, so the library always had a Texana collection and genealogy materials. In 1968, in the library, it was under the heading of a general history and general reference collection in social sciences. But in 1995, under the director, June Garcia, when the library moved into the 600 Soledad location, that is when the library formally established the department Texana and Genealogy, which is located on the 6th floor of the Central Library.
You know, that's a high security. That's the highest security place in the library that you need to get access to, and that's pretty amazing. That the concept of preserving these documents is so critical to the community. As we move into digitization and we start communicating in different ways and writing letters, how is the library and Texana going to be able to preserve those important documents and artifacts that you're currently preserving?
After me? Well, you said it. One option, well, there's two options. First of all, two that come to mind immediately. So the value of Texana cannot be overemphasized, because that's collecting and preserving our history, local history, so that we can learn more about who we are, how we got to where we are today, our culture, our history, how the city first evolved. So all that information is very important in preserving our history and a voice of the past. And so how do you preserve that? One, by creating conditions to keep these very rare items preserved. You indicated there's high security. You probably are referring to the fact that we have a vault that is climate controlled, and that's where we keep our very rare and very important items, very valuable items. But back to the digitization, as part of the project that you'll be hearing more about in terms of transforming the Texana collection, which also includes genealogy, and I'll talk about the genealogy and the importance of the genealogical collection. And so digitizing and going forward with a vision to digitize the collection is part of the vision for the future. Obviously, we're going to need resources, but we're fortunate that we have the support of the San Antonio Public Library Foundation and the L3 Committee that are helping to help us to realize this vision, because we really need to preserve that history and that voice that is in books, that are in multidimensional items. And so digitizing parts of the collection, significant parts of the collection, is one way of preserving it. Not only to preserve it, but also to facilitate access to it. Keep in mind that many of the items that we have that are important may be fragile, and it's not wise to handle them on a regular basis, because then we lose it, because it falls apart. So the option is to digitize it. That way we can make it more available to people to access it. And so that's very important. That digitizing of the collection is very important.
Well, tonight we have every show we do a thing called Found Photos or Found Images, where we find things or people send stuff to us, and it's pretty amazing. And since we are dealing with Texana and we're dealing with San Antonio and we're dealing with environment right now, the photos that we found through your collection are from the 1921 flood. It's 30 photos that we chose and have put together as a collage tonight, and we really want to show the public the kinds of imagery that's hidden at Texana. So let's if you don't mind, we're gonna watch this 30 images that you provided. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Greg Harman, and I'm a former journalist. I'm the founder and co-editor of Deceleration.news and a clean energy organizer with the Sierra Club. I want to thank URBAN-15 for giving me the opportunity to host this segment of Hidden Histories, which is dedicated to the hidden histories of environmental struggle and resistance in San Antonio, which can mean a lot of things, right? I mean, we're talking about water, we're talking about green space, we're talking about energy generation and the pollution that causes, and ultimately we're going to end up talking about climate change and all of these struggles and all these conversations we've had as a community ultimately to kind of lead to this moment. And so we wanted to talk about disaster, we want to talk about risk, which can mean a lot of different things, and we want to talk about equity. Disaster is sort of just what the earth does, right? I mean, the earth is unpredictable, it's volatile. Being a human on the planet is to live with risk. But while legal concepts like acts of God allow us to distance ourselves from blame when it comes to some of these horrific events, in human communities and the cities that we build, we kind of choose those who live and die in a lot of ways. These results are predetermined. This flood of 1921 we're going to talk a little bit about, as well as, within climate change, are you living upstream or downstream? Are you on expensive high ground, or are you on the cheap lowlands? Are you wealthy? Are you poor? And oftentimes we'll find, are you white or are you a person of color? All these things impact the result of disaster, and they're things that we agree upon, these agreements we make through our politics. So this is the lens we're going to use as we look back over the history of San Antonio, at least over these last 100 years, and also encouraging those who are watching, those in the audience here, to really think about something that I've taken to heart, which is this notion of climate and environmental resistance, protesters, or as increasingly they're representing themselves, protectors, land defenders. E.O. Wilson, a famous biologist, sees this movement and this kind of churning cultural movement as the Earth's own immune response kicking in. So when we talk about many of these issues, kind of just think to yourself what it means to be a part of the resistance and in league with the entire beautiful web of life that we are lucky enough to be born into. I do want to look also at these stories, these case studies, if you will, as precursors to environmental justice, to where we are today, to the 4 million folks who around the world marched to end fossil fuels. And so I'm really excited to bring in our first guest, Kenneth Walker from UTSA, to speak about the storm of 1921 and understanding that this is where your book, you're working on a book. I'll be able to describe that, mm-hmm. and maybe starting off why the Great Flood of 1921 in San Antonio.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. And in some of my research, I work in an English department and I study environmental science communication. And so San Antonio, of course, has a long history of extreme weather events and colonial social orders, right? And I think in studying the responses to these kinds of events portends ways in which we can learn from our history to study responses that we may have to, conduct in the fast forward here in the future. And while I do look at the 1921 flood as one of the first events, because it really crystallizes a lot of the issues that you kind of foregrounded, one of the earliest flood events ever recorded in San Antonio was from 1819, where the Spanish colonizers had described the major flood happening at the time as a culebra de agua. And there's a lot of ways to look at that, but one of the things that I argue there is that from colonial relations to land and people come colonial monsters. And the 21 event, it really does crystallize that sentiment, because the voices coming out of that event are many, all across the city. And one of them, that documented a history that came out of the West Side barrios, was by this man named Jose Quiroga, who wrote, along with his team of journalists, a fascinating pamphlet called La Tragedía de la Inundación de San Antonio.
We saw a cover and some images from that on the screen a minute ago.
Yeah, and that was the cover of his pamphlet that he was selling,
mm-hmm.
to people after the event. And one of the things that he talks about there is the inequity of the impact, right? And so he figures the watersheds in different ways. So he talks about in the San Antonio River, it took away pianos and Venetian carpets, and it took away all this wealth. But on the west side creeks, El Azan, he calls them, they were monstrous, right? They gorged on human flesh. They took away families and children. And and it's describing that inequity. It wasn't just about the sort of figuration of understanding, the differences there, but it was also in the impact of the policy decisions, right? So one of the things that I argue is we can understand that figuration as a analogical verification of the rampant anti-Mexican violence happening in the 1920s.
That's what I wanted to actually ask about, the personification of Alazan Creek, right, which is described as a monster. I wrote a couple notes for myself, but it was because the river destroyed wealth, it was these traders gorged on human flesh to vomit up putrid, revolting, nauseating, and so this is the water itself, which is really interesting. And I thought, well, why would it be the water and not the system, right? The cultural and the social and political system, where, like you described, the water's coming from the north, right? And it's doing the property damage downtown, the merchants and the bankers, and the death is on the west side. But the author seems to be pointing out that the water is to blame. But I think that's not quite a good, accurate read. You can maybe open that up a little bit.
That's right, and that kind of figures with the notion of an act of God, right? And people, historians and others who have studied these events have long argued that claims like that really elie the social political choices that we make, where floods are just natural and it's humans that provide the disaster, right? And I think one of the things that Quiroga's doing there is, on the surface you can read it as, it's an easy way to shift blame. But really I think that figuration of a monstrosity is getting at the way people and land relate. And the ensuing political decisions, to only build protection on Almost Dam, and then only give a few $1,000s to the West Side Creeks.
So that's what happened in this case.
And this is what happens in
They
this
recommended equal investment, is that correct?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because the West Side voices are coming out calling for equity, describing the inequity of the impact. And the Committee for Science and Technology at the time had said very similar things. They said, you need to invest this much on Almost area and Almost Dam, and also an equitable amount, a reasonable equitable amount on the West Side creeks. And so the science and the West Side voices were very much aligned in that particular moment. But it's only in the ensuing political decision that it really becomes another almost literal enactment of racial violence. So even though you have all these diverse voices, our political decisions still need a public reckoning. And I think that history has to be recognized and learned from and acknowledged.
And informing us today. I mean, we're going to get into that with more of our speakers here today. And water is such a huge part of this. Water is a recurring theme. It is a point of resistance in San Antonio, and whether we're talking about, right now, Vista Ridge, coming to terms with Vista Ridge as this multi-billion-dollar project where it's this taking from the rural areas, maybe low-income rural areas, into the city. It's also questions about pollution of the Edwards Aquifer, which historically has been our water, right? Our sole source water. Or so many, or the flooding, right? And we're still dealing with flooding, and especially I think on the south side. And we'll talk a little bit around the Kelly Air Force Base area and how that continues to push forward, toxic contamination back into the watershed and exposing our communities. So. We're used to stories about lawsuits. The Sierra Club had a big lawsuit that forced the city to get off of one source of protecting endangered species, and policy fights. We're not used to, and was a surprise to me, was to run into someone who was doing something a little more radical to protect the Edwards Aquifer, and that is he was a high school student at the time named Olin Sluter, and we've got a video here to run of our conversation.
The time period we're really talking about is pretty much the late 70s into the early 80s, period when I was in high school. I was ROTC, so I had some training in things like patrolling and night operations, things like that. And a group of us were heavily influenced by Edward Abbey and his work in the Southwest, in particular a book called The Monkey Wrench Gang. One of the big concerns at the time, at least for us as a group, was we really weren't thinking in terms of climate change directly. We were thinking in terms of overpopulation and overuse of resources, really. And that ultimately would drive things like climate change. But it was really more overpopulation and issues like that. And we just saw this huge amount of development starting to occur, particularly towards the north. And I lived on the northeast side, still live on the northeast side. And we saw this growth out towards the north, and then increasingly towards the northwest, out the I-10 corridor. And we were just really apprehensive, for lack of a better term, about it, because at the time San Antonio's sole source of water was the aquifer. And you were faced with a situation that if anything happened over the recharge zone, you were affecting 800,000 to 1 million people directly. Their source of drinking water. What we ended up doing is we ended up forming small, basically revolutionary cells, is really the only way to put it. Because we saw the only way to deal with it, we saw protest as ineffective. We felt direct action, a little more, not so much violent direct action, but a little more serious direct action was required. So we, like I said, looked to Edward Abbey and his book, The Monkey Wrench Gang in particular, as almost a how to do it book. Literally a how to do it book. Things like going out to sites where they were about to clear cut trees and spiking trees, taking large nails, driving them into the trees. Doesn't hurt the tree, but when you go in with a chainsaw and it hits those spikes, chains break, damages the equipment. Or, for example, earth moving equipment, sand in the oil crankcases, sugar in the fuel tanks, cutting hydraulic lines, basically disabling the earth moving equipment, trying to cause as much of a monetary loss, not so much in equipment loss, but in slowing them down and screwing up their timetables, that they would hopefully abandon it. In most cases they did not, but it would slow them down and it would cost them so much money that they would think twice about the next development. And that was really what our kind of driving force was. We didn't want to injure anyone, but so we would put up signs, for example, that trees were spiked. They would still go in and they would still cut down the trees. And what actually ended up happening at one point is someone was injured when a chain broke on a chainsaw and it kicked back and struck them and they were injured. And so we actually stopped spiking trees after that. Luckily, over those years, conversations started to occur about protecting the aquifer. You had conversations about the need for green spaces. So you started to see the production of areas like O.P. Schnabel Park here, or McAllister Park, Hardburger Park, the greenways along the creeks like Leon Creek and Salado Creek, which are these extensive 13, 14 mile long linear parks. And so you started to see this increasing interest, it seemed, in people protecting green spaces. I think it was the younger people driving the older people to be vocal, and them having power, being able to do something about it. I can't advocate for anything illegal, obviously, but I think the more voices that are heard in the forms of protests and demonstrations, the more that people will pay attention.
For many people in San Antonio, T.C. Calvert needs no introduction. He's worked here as a community organizer for decades, president of the neighborhood Neighborhoods First Alliance since, is it 1977?
1972.
72, okay. And it's because of him, I think, that many people were exposed for the first time to terms like environmental racism, environmental justice, these concepts that came into San Antonio a little bit later, but early 90s, I would guess, late 80s, early 90s. And he's been involved with taking on polluters in the south side, the east side, whether it's landfills, Superfund sites, storage tanks, CPS Energy, which is one of our favorites. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could just let folks know a bit about your history and where you were trained and how you got involved here in San Antonio.
Well, first of all, let me thank Climate Action and Urban-15 for having this historical event to get the verbal history of environmental justice and environmental racism issues in this city. I don't have enough time tonight to talk about the many issues that we worked on from a national perspective and also from a local perspective. But I was trained by some of the best organizers in the United States of America. Charles Middleton, who's now deceased, and also Shell Trapp, who was an organizer for the National Training Information Center. And then a lot of it is just self-taught and by reading a lot of books and just learning it firsthand by just doing it. The Neighborhood First Alliance is a multi-issue group. We just don't deal with environmental issues. So we deal with crime, we deal with street and drainage, we deal with voter stuff. Right now we're dealing with the redistricting issue here in the state of Texas. But we've been doing it on the national level where we worked with National People's Action, where we worked with about 10 cities that had pollution problems, either with incinerators or with garbage dumps or whatever. And we would ask the Environmental Protection Agency, would they hold hearings in these cities throughout the United States, and we were very successful to do it. We had to hold the action at the Environmental Protection Agency where we showed up with 1,000 people. Then Carol Browner was the Environmental Protection Agency person. So we went to her house on a Sunday evening at about 6 o'clock, and it was raining, and she kind of saw us coming, and she ran out the back door. But she didn't want to face us.
Talk about a diversity of tactics.
Yes, sir.
There.
And then, so the next day, we showed up at the Environmental Protection Agency with about 20 busloads of people because she didn't show up at our meeting, and she ran from us then too. But they shut the elevators down on her, so we call it elevator wars. And we had about 20 leaders that were able to meet with them to get these hearings in San Antonio. San Antonio then was dealing with dome dirt, and we were dealing with the BFI garbage dump issue, where I was able to organize a lot of farmers and ranchers, Republicans, independents.
Well, let me ask you, because I did want to ask you about the kind of the birth of Neighborhoods First Alliance, and we were talking about water. So flooding was an early one of those organizing issues, right?
Absolutely.
Can you walk us forward from that?
Yes. The Neighborhoods First Alliance has been responsible for getting about $275 million in street and drainage problems in the communities. As the previous gentleman talked about, the history of the 1921 floods, well, we had a lot of people who died and who drowned and had their homes washed away because of the flooding issues in east, south, and the west side of San Antonio. So we actually cut our teeth on doing street and drainage projects, and we still have some issues that we're dealing with today. We still have issues over in Elbendorf. We have issues in some of our areas where people still have dirt roads and mud. So yes, street and drainage was a big issue with us.
Yeah, and in describing all of the different struggles that y'all have been engaged with, and these notions of, maybe we can define even what environmental racism for folks that maybe haven't heard the term.
Well,
but you're doing all this work, so you're getting an intersectional education.
Let me just say this: environmental racism, environmental justice is very simple. When you have 50% or 60% of the fuel storage gas tanks in the eastern sector of San Antonio, that's environmental racism. When you have dirty Deely plant, CPS Energy, which is located in the southeast side of the city, and you have cancer clusters within these neighborhoods, because we did health surveys. We actually went door to door in 105-degree heat. And we had the help from students from all over the United States college kids that came into San Antonio from Cleveland, from New York, from Austin, who went door to door, and we asked people, how many people in your household have rashes or asthma and all this. So they would say it was anecdotal information, but when you're getting information from the residents and the people, I don't call that anecdotal. That's the facts. That's coming from the people.
Right.
And they told us that they've had members in their family that die of cancer. And so we knew it was a problem because CPS Energy, in the summertime, people couldn't even put their sheets out on. You remember in the old days when we didn't have washer and dryer, you could put your sheets and your pillowcases and your underwear out and hang them on a line. Well, people in the southeast sector of San Antonio couldn't do that because of the toxins and the snot
soot,
and the
yeah.
soot that came from CPS Energy. So we were the first group, and we blew CPS's mind that actually had an action on them, and we took a busload of people to protest CPS Energy on Dirty Deely, and I hope you'll show some photos of it and you
Yeah.
have it. But that kind of just blew their mind that here comes these people up against the very powerful coal plant people, up against look, we were up against a lot of money. We didn't have the money, but we had the people power. And so that's how we would win these issues. We took over some CPS Energy meetings, and sometimes you gotta be disruptive, but it was civil disobedience. We didn't do the stuff that the last guy talked about, but we were very vocal, and I stand on the shoulders of people like Robert Dawson, who is now deceased, who was a part of the San Antonio Environmental Coalition on on environmental justice, Arlene Washington, great people. These were great citizens that have now passed away and gone on. So I'm very thrilled that the young people, it gave me goosebumps the other day when I saw all these young people from around the world, Brother Bella, talking about the climate action. I mean, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
And so we got to pass the torch
And
to those young people.
we got a little video. We're gonna close out this installment with the video of CPS, and we did, thanks to your work and many other people who worked on Dirty Deely, we got that retired earlier, about 16 years early, and we are gonna talk about, you talk about the door-to-door work, and the Alvarados are here tonight to. We're gonna see a video with them in terms of when you put the crosses in your yard and you start surveying your neighborhood, it becomes a very real thing. So, and I know you did toxic tours. I'm going to real quickly,
when we did the toxic tours.
Real quickly.
Toxic tours were the most effective way of protest throughout the United States. We still have groups in parts of the United States that do the toxic tours. The press loved the toxic tours because you were going from one toxic site to another. What we would do is we would go to Kelly. As most of you know, there was a lot of pollution at Kelly Air Force Base, and they had a lot of cancer clusters over there. So we would go and do a toxic tour there. We would leave there. We would go to the dome dirt, and we would show where they were putting slag and dome
Contaminated dirt down in the east side.
In the east side and around the city. We would go to CPS Energy. CPS didn't like it when we call them Dirty Deely. And then we did a tour where we would go to the BFI garbage dump, which we called Mount Trashmore in East San Antonio. And we started a chant where we called them a bad, filthy industry. And one of the proudest moments I had is organizing these ranchers and these farmers. Here comes this black guy, and I'm organizing very conservative people. Brother Belly, you probably remember that. And we took 6 busloads of people from China Grove, East Gardendale, St. Hedwig, to the TNRCC meeting in Austin, Texas, and it just blew their mind that we showed up to protest. So you probably say, well, what did you get out of it? Well, we got a lot out of it because we were able to have them to put the previous covers and things over to cut down on the methane gas and to cut down on a lot of stuff. A lot of people don't know. The weatherization program started from the Neighborhoods First Alliance. The people at CPS Energy, they'll tell you that they started the weatherization program. But I'm here to tell you today, the weatherization program came from grassroots people from the east side of San Antonio to weatherize people's homes. The $300 million that they're spending to retrofit and to clean up Dirty Deely and the solar and environmental things that they have going on now, that all started from the San Antonio Coalition on Environmental and Economic Justice. And a lot of the people who worked with us on that are now going home to glory. So we all the favor to them.
Yeah, well, we do have several in this room. We were talking about the toxic tours. We were talking about the Kelly Air Force Base, where for decades the Air Force, and not unlike many other military bases around the country, were dumping highly toxic, heavy solvents into the shallow water table. And this is trichloroethylene, or TCE. This is the Aaron Brockovich story, I think. And the Alvarados are here today, and I do want to say happy 59th anniversary to them. They've been guiding influences in San Antonio around the Kelly neighborhoods there. They have survived many of the same illnesses and cancers that have taken away many of their neighbors.
That's right.
And condolences on the recent death of their daughter to cancer as well. But I wanted to share the video. And the thing about when we get into hidden histories, it's not just where we've been, but where we are. A hidden history is a trajectory, right? And if it's shrouded in the contemporary, I'm going to count that as a hidden history, because there are still people dying around the Kelly neighborhoods. That plume and the consequences of that have not disappeared. And so I hope we can listen to and really honor their words in this short interview we had.
When they were doing work at Kelly, they had a well, and that well, everything that was no good, they would dump it into that well, and many things would be dropped in there. And then finally they found out that what they were throwing, the acid inside the well was eating up the metal and everything that was in there. So they started looking, the EPA and everybody came in and looked at it, and they found out that the chemicals are so strong they were traveling under our homes. And they travel from here to San Antonio River. And now we're living under a contamination area that we can't even sell our home because we have to tell them that we're under the contamination.
The Purple Cross campaign started because they said, what if we find out how many people are in this neighborhood that are passing from cancer and different diseases and all this. So we went up and down block walking and asking the people. And they said, oh, well, yeah, we have a family member, or I'm sick. And so would you like a purple cross so we could mark your house? Sure. So we would put the crosses. Well, there was so much death and everything going on that we ran out of crosses. So you could tell how bad it was because everything had purple crosses. And then the Air Force got mad. They said, you should have told us before you put those purple crosses. And we said, why? You never told us that you were going to contaminate us, so why should we tell you about the purple crosses? But they didn't like it because they said that, you know, like we had gone behind their back or something. I mean, that's ridiculous. But everybody wanted a purple cross because they had somebody. And people are still dying every day of cancer and everything in these neighborhoods. There was the cancer to start with, leukemia, a lot of Lou Gehrig's, muscles, just on and on and on. People losing their hair and their fingernails rotting and falling off. All of this stuff was going on. Immune system, all these ladies having 4 or 5 miscarriages. Everything was just all in a cluster right here.
You don't have to go too far. My wife, cancer. My daughter, cancer. She passed away. Me, kidney failure. And I can't even get surgery because my kidneys won't extend from my surgery. My hips are so bad, they're all gone, and I'm struggling with life. We have a map that the government gave us where the chemicals started and how they were traveling under our homes, all the way through under schools, and the kids in school, they have all this asthma and all this allergies because they're under. The school is on top of all the chemicals, so people, and they don't even realize how bad it is. But we do because we have all these reports from the government.
You know, one time the man from the Air Force that we were having a round table, he said, Well, yeah, we know we contaminated you and everything, but, well, what we can do is we can all line up and you can throw pies at us if that'll make you feel better. What? Like it was a
Make
joke.
a joke for them.
You know? And we just like,
¿Cómo se llama, dijo?
I don't even know, entwine or something.
Mr. Entwine.
And I said, no, I mean, they're not taking it serious there. Mm-mm. They finally admitted because they kept saying that the contamination didn't leave the fence. It was behind the fence,
Right.
you know? So then they found out all the 6 plumes are under the houses and all that. So we did a lot of work with Southwest Workers Unions and
Different and then we went to different conferences around the country to bring our issues. Everywhere that there was a military base, they would ask for us to go and tell them our story. So we traveled many states with the contamination problems. They had the same thing we were going through. You know what we were asking? To have a doctor's office here in the south side that would be checking for the people that were sick with cancer and all this, but we have to go all the way to the medical center, so way on the other side of town. So a lot of people can't go out there, so they just fade away.
a lot of people are just sick. They just can't travel no more or walk or do whatever, you know. It is very, very sad when we talk to the you talk to the people that they tell you their stories. I mean, it hurts, you know, when you hear and then, well, I've already lost 5 babies. Can you tell me why? And it's just unbelievable that they turned a blind eye to what's going on here on the south side.
They ought to pass a law on the government because the Air Force can come in anywhere and they can move out without cleaning nothing. And there's nothing that can say, well, you got to do this for us. No, they just pack up and go. So that's a damage for the country. I know they're doing it for the country, but what they leave behind is sickness and death. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So last month, as we mentioned, over 4 million people around the world marched for climate action, for an end to the fossil fuel age. Young people across San Antonio gathered over several days, marched here as well. And when we talk about climate action, as we will with our next guest when she comes up, we're talking about a climate action plan that the city's been developing, which target or identifies CPS Energy as the primary driver, primary polluter of greenhouse gases in the region. And yet, it's been, despite being a city-owned utility, has been extremely difficult for the community or even the council or past mayors to control or to motivate or maneuver in terms of generation decisions. Some years ago, decade ago, CPS began pursuing the expansion of the South Texas Project nuclear complex down on the coast, and that led to 2 years of really hot, disputed activity in the community, in the boardrooms, at council, on the streets, trying to move us and really warn the utility that they were heading into turbulent waters. This was the first attempt to revive kind of an industry, the nuclear industry, that had really been on the ropes for decades. And we saw, I guess, what were inevitable consequence, which was a massive price overrun of that project. Eventually, the city had to sue its way out of the project. And then a group of folks sued to try to get more information about how it all happened. The SEALs, Russell and Karen Seal, they're longtime volunteers with the Sierra Club Alamo group here in San Antonio, have had really front row seats to the entire process, and we had a really interesting and enlightening conversation about this process as well as others. But we may have a couple different videos online with the Hidden Histories project. But this one I think was particularly interesting to share when it comes to power in San Antonio community organizing.
The announcement, that was the opening salvo that they're going to have. The nuclear announcement came first, our opening salvo with energy recommendations to the City of San Antonio and CPS Energy. That was the battle line. That was the cannon shot. And that cannon shot led to 2 years of very strong opposition to the nuclear fight. STP 3 and 4 was to more than double the capacity, building 2 more nuclear reactors that were down on the Gulf Coast near Bay City that were jointly owned by NRG, the City of San Antonio, and Austin still had a small share into it. This would have been a 50-50 partnership with just CPS Energy and NRG. And the lie was revealed by an insider from NRG that came to Castro and told him that CPS Energy is not telling you the truth. Our cost estimates are more in the 18 plus price range, and they're telling you 13 price. And then the day before a bond vote that the city council was going to have to approve the first salvo of bonds to build this thing, he told them that it would be, what's it called, a Sarbanes-Oxley violation? Something like that. I forget the legal term. But he told them that if the city votes on this, you will have huge legal problems. And I got a call from Ray Lopez in the pharmacy, and he said, "Russell, we're having a press conference at 11 o'clock. Can you get over here?" And I said, "I'm filling prescriptions." And he says, "It's dead. We are killing it right now. They lied." And I mean, that call that he gave to me is burning my brain.
This is not the area of law I practice, so I was kind of shocked when Smitty and Karen came to me and said, "Would you consider intervening in a lawsuit so that we can get all the information that is out there?" And we should be able to get it under a Freedom of Information Act request, but we're not getting it. So would you be interested in, helping us with the lawsuit and intervening on our behalf? I remember going to this deposition and receiving everything and having to sign a paper saying we would not reveal anything in this materials that they handed us, or they would close down the deposition and they would find a way to keep us out of it. And I said, if it's proprietary information, I'm glad to sign. Well, it turned out I did sign, and it was not proprietary information. What it was information that really the ratepayers wanted. There were things on who signed what, who did what, and there were some very incriminating things within there, but every bit of that information that I can never share was something that the people should have had information about, was things that the city council should have known, and it should have been easy to get under a Freedom of Information request. We're better off in some ways in that we now have a conversation that was started by Doyle Beneby, who said we're going to have monthly meetings with stakeholders.
Mayor Castro started it.
Sure.
Doyle thinks he started it, but it was Mayor Castro.
Either way, the fact was Doyle Beneby had these things going, and we had meetings frequently, and we could talk to them. So we were giving input. I don't know that input has been ever used in the way we had hoped it would be, and I don't know that CPS listens or that they really understand that they are a municipal owned corporation that is supposed to be working for the city and for the people. And that concerns me. That's the part that we haven't broken through yet, and I'm not sure why.
We're not going to get it done at the utility end. It's going to take City Hall, governance committee at City Hall under a strong mayor is going to have to rein it in. It's to make a long-term permanent change. We had a missed opportunity. We need to go and address it again, and we need to be, our council people come and go too fast. But so we have to get to the deep state inside of City Hall, the city managers, and getting them to understand the need to, that this 10-year-old, decade-ago conversation has been left undone. And we need to be organizing and putting our efforts with the mayor we have now that we have to get this fixed. And until we get the governance, the relationship between COSA and CPS fixed, any changes and things that we might do in the short run are not going to have long-term permanent fixes.
Yeah, so the challenge in San Antonio related to climate and related to just environmental illness, we heard from TC Calvert on the you put your hang out your wash and it comes in gray and black and all the rest. This has been an ongoing struggle in San Antonio. Climate is somewhat different in that you don't always see what's coming out of carbon dioxide, and some of these greenhouse gases aren't visible, but that was an interesting case. That was $400 million that CPS Energy ended up writing off of ratepayer, taxpayer money. And now we're engaged with a conversation, or should be engaging more deeply in a conversation about Spruce, our remaining coal plant that represents roughly half or a little over half of all of our emissions, greenhouse emissions in San Antonio. So to talk about the climate plan, which has been under development and comes up for a vote on the 17th of October. Diana Lopez is here with us. She's the director of Southwest Workers Union, a Chicana activist who says she grew up at the end of the runway at Kelly Air Force Base. So when we're talking about Kelly, the plume, the public health crisis that's there, she's well acquainted with that. And also served with the climate plan on the equity working group, and so has a good, I was excited that you agreed to come on because you've got a great complex analysis that can help tie together a lot of the conversations that we've had here on this stage tonight. We talk about the flood of 21, and that we were having, or some people were having or encouraging a conversation about equity, about, don't just invest, don't put all the money up on the Northside, guard everybody's wealth, but you need to put money into where people's lives are in jeopardy. In 100 years, what's changed?
Well, there's often this notion that a lot of these cycles of environmental racism are, they're just like that, they're cycles. They keep continuing to happen unless there's something changes within that system. And so when we talked about equity, it's been a long and difficult journey, 18-month-long struggle to even make the case for why certain neighborhoods are more affected than other ones.
Within the climate plan
within
process,
the climate action plan, yes. And I think in terms of city government, it's not institutionalized. I think us as community residents, we know it's there because we face it every day. But for somebody who doesn't live in a neighborhood, it's difficult for them to understand. And so one of the first steps that we had during the climate action plan and the equity team was ensure that there was studies, that we did our own studies, but that also that there was city-based, university-based studies looking at certain levels of race, of class, of poverty, looking at census data, looking at tree canopy, all these different factors to make the case for why certain neighborhoods needed more investments than others, and how certain neighborhoods were going to be more affected than others. Those neighborhoods ended up being the west, the south, and the east side of San Antonio.
Yeah, I've seen those maps, and really, when it comes conceptually, I mean, we talk about on a global level with the climate crisis, this idea that those who are least culpable, those who contribute the least to the climate crisis, typically still bear the greatest burden from that because they don't have resources, they're positioned geographically, what have you, all these issues we've been talking about tonight. And these maps you're describing, I mean, these are, where you would take, the tree cover, tree canopy map, you'll overlay that with, where are the elderly or the very young, or where are the sick, or where the low income. And when you lay that out, and where is it hottest, where's the heat island, you get these bright red, parts of the city. And so, yeah, I mean, do you feel like, and yet in that conversation, I feel like, as working as a steering member, observing all these different committees, what happened, or maybe you can explain to the audience and viewers, what happened when the Equity Committee tried to create a definition suggesting that those most impacted should be leading the response to the climate crisis in San Antonio?
Everybody agreed that there were most vulnerable neighborhoods, but everybody didn't agree that those neighborhoods needed to be part of the table that makes the decision and the policy. And so that's all we were asking, as somebody from one of those neighborhoods that is often seen as a case study or or just a census marker. All we're asking is to be part of that table. And that's where the biggest challenges lie within council, is that all of the language that said that those most vulnerable, those most affected drive that change was taken out.
And you've got an open letter. I think the majority of the Equity Committee, can you just describe what your message is to the city now? And this is an active case, right?
Of course, yes, and we've been presenting it, and it's still been active even though the working groups haven't met. And there's been a lot of support pushing forth a continuation of an equity team as part of the climate action plan, which wasn't originally part of, or was taken out as a continuation of the climate action plan. And then the second one was that there continues to be active participation of neighborhoods, so ways to engage people outside who are working families who are most affected in an equitable way. So meetings that are in the evening, information translated, an honest and true conversation with people who might be part of a zone that might get flooded. And so what type of funding is available for these areas that have historically been flooding, but still when the issue is systemic, how do we change that structure where then the rights or the wrongs that have happened throughout history are not only addressed but also are included within this analysis of climate change.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Before the show, we were together speaking with Kenny Walker, and he shared this urgency, about we've spent 100 years having a conversation about equity. And the climate crisis is this great compression of time and risk and disaster, and we don't have another 100 years to get this right. We have a very short period. So I wonder if you could just briefly, before we close out with a more uplifting video, describe what's next and where people can be putting their focus going forward.
Right. So there's this framework called just transition, and the reality is moving from the bad things to the good things. And so we're in the gray area right now that we have to create those solutions that are true and that are honest and that are based in communities and the reality in order to reach the good space where and we're talking about clean air, clean water, land, access to good food, things like that. We're not talking about some crazy utopian type of world. We're just talking to the basic necessities that we've been fighting for 100 years.
Yeah.
And so what I recommend is this is happening behind the scenes. Oftentimes, we need to be the ones that are moving forward the education. So the vote is happening next week on the 17th. And please inform yourself. And if it's something that aligns with your values, with your work, if it's something that's connected to what you're facing right now, then we need you there. We talked about people power and how that shifts minds, and that's what we're talking about is combining and being part of something where we are in the same in the same value system and in the same notion as we want to move forward away from pollution. And if it doesn't reach our heart, if it doesn't reach our community, if it continues to pollute, it's not a solution.
Yeah. Fantastic, and I have to offer a lot of appreciation for many of y'all who have been up here on the stage with me today, and I see folks in the community and the audience who were a part of this effort that got our oldest power plant, which was a huge polluter, heavy metals going into the community. That those who are informed know it. In utero, children can be exposed to just a minute amount of lead or mercury, and that's a lifetime, learning disabilities, whatever, the soot, the pollution, those. Anyway, we have a video celebrating that plant was shut down, like I said, 16 or so years early, and December 31 of last year, down to the hour, right, of what they promised, and we're going to close out with that. And thank you all for joining us online. Thank you for you all in the audience, and for those who came up and to visit with me, Urban 15 and Deceleration tonight. Hold it up, show us what you got.
All right, she's pumping coal. Some people pump iron, she's pumping coal.
Breaking the coal cycle. So we're down here at Calvert Lake today. It's the last day of the year. CPS Energies promised many years ago, 8 years ago, that they were going to shut down the dirty Deely coal plant, which is the stack you see that's not blowing right now. Originally it was by 2018, and later they said they would shut it down in 2018, and then they decided they would run it to the very last day of 2018, which is today. So we've been celebrating. There's dozens of community groups celebrating with us. We've got representatives of the Sierra Club down here, Energía Mía, and other organizations. The sun's out, it's a little chilly, and there's a lot less lead and mercury, lung clogging, particulates, and sulfur dioxides, nitrogen oxides, and climate pollution, CO2 and CO2 equivalent pollution, millions of metric tons a year. And so we're walking into a new year and witnessing the end of coal in San Antonio, and I believe the end of coal power around the world. So this is a local representation of a global manifestation of the rise of clean energy and a new way of being, just and healthy jobs for all.
What prompted me to get involved in fighting CPS Energy on air pollution was in the pharmacies, seeing these on high ozone days, the amount of asthma inhalers and stuff I was seeing in the spring and then in the fall. These two ozone seasons that we have is right before school starts. The amount of asthma inhalers in the west side neighborhoods and the south side neighborhoods that I worked in for 35 years, I saw the correlation between what our coal plants and our other pollutants from the cars and stuff that we drive put out into the air. And you can see it in the pharmacies, not just in the hospitals, but what the small children and mothers and these neighborhoods go through.
I live a few miles from the Calvert CPS plant. I'm just south of it, and I've been very concerned after I found out what was coming out of the smokestacks, because I have mercury poisoning, and I'm in my upper 50s, and I started getting real sick in my late 20s, and I progressed to where I had to quit work, and I'm still not able to hold down a normal job, all from mercury poisoning. And so I'm real concerned about how much mercury is released from the plant. and I worry about the environment and the people, especially the little kids, who are breathing in all the toxic that comes from there.
I am celebrating the end of the Deely coal-fired power plant's power planting. It's a good day for San Antonio. My history is that I was with the Alamo Area Council of Governments from the late 90s, and we worked on ozone. I've come full circle now after retiring. I'm working on the steering committee of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan on the city's carbon plan. So it is full circle in the sense that I've seen a lot of local arguments for and against air pollution, for and against energy generation in different means, but coming to an end of fossil fuel generation here is an important step. It should be seen as a step in San Antonio's history and a step in San Antonio's evolution.
Thank you for coming back to Hidden Histories. This all ties in together because everything that we've done tonight has to do about how the community can participate in creating the landmark offerings and the landmark events of a community through time. And one of the biggest factors we have with time is passing. And some cultures take passing in a very sad way, and we all feel it at a personal level. But the Hispanic community in San Antonio has embraced a very traditional way of celebrating the passing of our families with the Dia de los Muertos. And this is part of the collection of data and stories and things. And we have two guests today, right now, Becky Barrera and Mary Gutierrez, who are from the Latina Leadership for the Library initiative, which is part of the San Antonio Library Foundation. And they are using Dia de los Muertos as a way to collect data, information, pictures, stories about our community. So that's enough. Becky, tell us what this is about this year.
The second project that we took on, our committee, the Latino Leadership for the Library Committee, is a subcommittee or a committee of the foundation board. And our project was to create a Latino Resource Center. And because knowing what our community's history is and knowing the size of our population and how we're probably very underrepresented in many parts of our city and historical, especially history and in our school books, we have been driving for at least 20 years that I can think of projects that bring awareness and attention to the Latino elements that are in the library, the authors, the books, the special collections. And so among them is the Latino Resource Center that we opened last year. We raised all the money for that through a variety of events. Our favorite one, of course, is the Katrina Ball. And this year we're having the third Katrina Ball at the end of the month on October the 26th. And the library is transformed overnight. We have beautiful calacas, decorations, and it becomes a place for learning not only about books and things, but also our history and learning about each other and the traditions that are part of the Katrina Ball. And the Katrina Ball centers around El Dia de Muertos, which is an old, ancient indigenous tradition that was kind of modified when the Spanish conquistadores came and the Catholic Church decided to bring those two holidays together as a way of enticing more indigenous people to participate in their religious ceremonies. And so Day of the Dead is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd. And it is All Saints Day is on November 1st and All Souls Day on November 2nd. And so the indigenous people just said, well, we're gonna have Los Angelitos, the children, on the first day, and we're gonna celebrate everybody else. And the theory is, of course, that you may pass, but it's a life cycle. You come back and visit once a year. And if anybody saw the movie Coco, it must have been very fun for everybody to see in a very easy way the whole story of what Dia de Muertos is about. So at our library, we build an elaborate altar. For about 15 or 20 years, we've been building small altars with books about the authors who have passed on recently. But now we decided, of course, with this ball that we've been creating and raising money for the Texana Center this year, we have gone more elaborate. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what an altar contains. This flower is the marigold, and we call it in Spanish, or in Nahuatl, it's cempasúchil. There's always copal, which is a burn. It's an incense, comes from the copal tree. There's always afeniques. This is a, believe it or not, this is made of sugar. And you always put favorite foods, and they're always usually made of sugar. That's really great fun. And of course, the sugar skull and a picture of the person you want to remember. So at our altar, we will have things like this and more things, and also the stories that are hidden that we hope to find in Texana. And
so with the Texana collection and where you're going with this, you're also finding that things that we thought were real aren't real at all. You often find that
some are and some are not.
So, San Antonio is a space with a lot of stories.
Exactly.
Now, I know your research through the years has been about trying to track down myths versus the real stuff. And I'd like to see something you found in this process of the Catrina Ball that could clarify things.
Okay, well, we're building an altar that is going to have tributes to many stories and many people from San Antonio, from South Texas, from people who have contributed to what's going on in San Antonio.
Including your grandparents.
Including your grandparents,
yes.
George. And, but you will see things like there is, one of the tributes will be to a man by the name of Jose Alejo. This is an interesting story because if any of you have seen the movie The Alamo, remember the old Alamo movie? And at the end of the movie, there's a lady who is leaving in a little wagon and she's carrying a little baby. He's that baby. He was the oldest, he was the survivor, and he's buried here in San Fernando. He was the oldest survivor when he died of the Alamo, the only one who was still alive. And so he's from San Antonio, became a city official, a policeman, all kinds of things in this city, and contributed a lot. So there are stories like that we will see. There are stories, the main altar, if you want me to talk about the main altar right now, the main altar that we are creating in the library will be up for a month this year. So everyone will have the opportunity to go and visit the altar during library hours. And what it's going to feature is all of the elements that a traditional altar has to offer. And so it will be a huge undertaking, but the centerpiece of it is the rose window. And those of us in San Antonio, and many people who visit San Antonio, because it is the second most visited architectural feature in all of San Antonio, is the rose window from the Mission era. It's at Mission San Jose. And so that is going to be the centerpiece, because one of the people who built that window, who sculpted it, who created it, was a man by the name of Pedro Huizar. Now, Pedro Huizar is the surveyor for all of San Antonio, all of the missions, San Antonio de Valero. He was a surveyor and a municipio. He ran certain areas and conducted the Indian affairs and so forth. But he is a master sculptor, master craftsman, and built that rose window. And the rose window is not in a place where you usually see that kind of window. If you go to the mission and you see it, that's usually over, the doorway, or it's a main attraction in most churches. But here they put it as a window at the sacristy. I can never get the word out. But it's not where you usually expect it. But it's like 6 by 10, this window. It's huge. And the story, there are like 40 different legends around the rose window. And one of the legends is that Pedro, in his youth, went to Spain, fell in love with this beautiful woman he found there, and he wanted to bring her back. And the family said, "Nuh-uh, you're not good enough. You don't have enough money. You're not good enough for our family." He came back brokenhearted, became this master craftsman, built this ornate and beautiful window and did all these beautiful things, sent money to the family, They said, okay, you're good enough now. They sent her by ship. The ship sunk. She never made it. That's one of the stories, okay? It's not true though, because if you go to Texana and you look up Pedro Huizar, you will find that he never went to Spain. He was born in Aguascalientes, Mexico, was married twice, had 7 children. You find out all the real stuff. So the connection between what our family stories are and what is here is very different sometimes. So what you'll see there at the altar is going to be Pedro on his knees saying, please, Rosa, because that's where the rose window comes from. So goes one of the stories. And she's going to be looking at him with a book from Texana in her hand and saying, what? Who are you? So there's a lot of good stories, but you do want to get to the meat.
Well, this concept of, I don't know how many families, it's 100 families or so that you're making little story boxes about? How many?
We're doing a lot of stories, and we hope to add this process of redeveloping Texana is going to take us about 3 years by the time the center is finally expanded and built and everything digitized in the way that was described earlier. So every year we want to add to the collection of stories, and we ultimately want to compile that into a study with study guides for our classrooms here in San Antonio. We want to circulate them to our teachers so that everyone learns the stories of Ramona Rios, who was a midwife and delivered 15,000 children in our West Side, all Hispanics. And she served as a medical practitioner at a time when there wasn't other help available in San Antonio. And guess, her journals are in Texana. Now that's a treasure. It's something you can't find anywhere else, but no one can touch it because it's in the vault. So that's part of why we want to build this and tell these stories and put them in the hands of teachers and children and lots of librarians and lots of family members.
It would be fascinating for me to know where these families were in terms of the watershed. What creeks or which arroyos, where they were.
Right.
Because what we've heard tonight about water, especially floods, the way histories are eliminated and they float downstreams, records,
who writes
this is important.
George? Who writes history? Isn't it usually the winners, the rich, the conquerors? And I believe that our history is missing in our textbooks. And if we can create these stories and make them as interesting as the one Mary just told us about Pedro, if we can get those stories, real stories, and if we can inspire the young people in our city to interview their elders and capture those stories and gather up their family photos and write their own little books and start learning who we really are, it gives you a sense of I can when you know what your roots are. In studies done after 9/11, those children whose families had, they did studies of the children and the impact, those families that were rooted and the kids knew the story of their family. My grandfather came, he did this, he built this business. They were able to bounce back right away. Kids who didn't have a sense of who they were and their roots, they were floundering, like, what am I gonna do now? Where am I gonna go? What am I gonna do? They had no idea that their family could give them strength and capacity for a great future. And that's what we want for our kids.
And it's something beautiful that Dia de los Muertos allows us to do, because the celebration, as you said earlier, are usually when someone passes, it's one of mourning. But in the Latino culture, in the Mexican culture, they saw it as a step. That's why in each altar there are 7 steps that lead to the underworld. It's a way to celebrate life, to keep life alive. There's a saying in Spanish that says you die 3 times. The first time when your body passes and it fails and it's no longer working. The second time is when they put your body into the ground, they actually bury you. And then the third time is when you're no longer remembered, when you're not spoken of anymore. So that's something to consider. You know, we want to keep this alive. So one way to do it is to celebrate our the people from our past. And if we celebrate these people, we're keeping them alive. And in the movie Coco that Becky referenced, you know, that's one of the storylines in there, is one of the guys is passing on, you know, he's fading away because they don't put him on the altar anymore. They don't save him anymore. They don't talk about him anymore. And so that is something that we want to keep alive. So these stories on the altar, there will be at least 30 stories there that you can walk through and read. There might be more that you can read about those things. But keep in mind, the story is one thing. The facts that we connect to in our research at Texana is the key.
The fact is I think we've run out of time for the evening, and this has been an amazing night. There's a lot to digest. We've gone through several valleys and hills and vistas provided by our guest. I want to thank you very much for coming here tonight. I want to thank Greg for what he put together, to Ramiro and to Heather for what they're doing at the public library, and I really want to thank our technical crew, Jonathan Anderson, who's up there in the video room. We have Homer Villarreal over here doing sound and helping us with production. We have Marisol Cortez, who's our head research person, and Kat Cisneros, which is our artistic director. We have a really nice team that provides a platform for people such as you to get your words out. So anyway, November 4th will be the next Hidden Histories. Thank you very much for logging on tonight, and we wish you the best. October. See you soon.